Central on a Monday afternoon. I'm Graham. That's John. We are here to chat a little bit about quite a few different things. It feels like we've finally sort of gotten out of the off-season lull in college football land. We used to have signing day to break that up, but now that all happens in December. So last couple of weeks have been the most action we've gotten since Georgia was laying TCU into the dirt out in Los Angeles. Obviously, this is a Georgia show, so we're going to start there. But we have not spoken since G-Day went down and spring practice ended for the Bulldogs. I was at the game. I know that you watched it as well. Yep. What are any thoughts, takeaways? What stood out to you from G-Day?
Man, tale of two halves, right? I mean, you had the offense, the first half, lighting it up, making everyone concerned about the defense. And then you had the defense in the second half, making everyone concerned about the offense, which I think is a successful spring game. My key takeaways, it's hard. You can't learn much from spring games. I think that's important for people to know. Spring games are scripted in many ways. They're generally the idea, right, is to try to give players the opportunity to showcase a little bit without showing too much and without getting anyone injured. And when all of those things collide, it makes this like kind of awkward experience sometimes. So with that being said, I really, really loved I enjoyed watching Carson Beck throw the football. From everything that we have heard, that I have heard from people who have been with the program, inside the program, watched scrimmages, G-Day was Carson Beck's best scrimmage, if you want to call it that, which I think it's interesting, right? It's great because he showed up when all the fans were there and played super well. It's also interesting that it's like, well, can you replicate that in practice and do the things that you need to do to actually be consistent when folks aren't there? And maybe he's just a gamer. But I loved seeing him throw the football. I love seeing him progress through reads. I mean, do some things that you want to see from a starting quarterback. So that was really exciting. And then also love seeing the young guys on defense. I mean, CJ Allen, that first play where he knocked Lawson Lucky for a flip it's pretty fun seeing those true freshmen who should still be in high school if you were a normal high schooler out there just popping pads and having a good time. So lots of good stuff to take away from a game that generally is hard to take much away from.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely agree with your quarterback assessment. Like, there was a lot of concern. I don't know, concern's maybe too strong of a word, but there was just no one at quarterback had really had, I think, a great scrimmage at any point in the spring. And then you come out G-Day, Carson starts, I think, 10 for 10 to 10 different receivers, something along those lines with, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looked really good. And it's funny you bring up the gamer point because I kind of had that same personal thoughts or revelations on it, but in a little bit of a shorter window because I was down on the field before the game.
All right.
And they were going through warm-ups, and unlike a regular Saturday, they were going through 7-on-7 drills with every different quarterback running a couple sort of 50-yard long 7-on-7 pass skeletons. And Carson was down there, and there was a throw that he had that was kind of that sort of same wheel route that he hit to Brock Bowers over on the sideline, kind of slot fade, whatever you want to call it. And he had the receiver open. It would have been a nice throw, but his player had separation and he just missed the throw. It was just a bad throw. And I was kind of standing there and I was like, I wonder if he's a little nervous, there's people here. This is kind of his moment, right? Everybody's wanting him to take this job. He really kind of hasn't so far in spring, like at least put a stranglehold on things. And then he comes out on the first drive and he's perfect. And he comes out on the second drive and he's perfect. And so, yeah, like I thought, we've heard the same things about Carson Beck for years, frankly, is that like guy's really talented, but he's just kind of a little more like chill, which is fine. Like there's a lot of good quarterbacks that you could describe as chill. David Green would be one of them, right? In Georgia history, in recent Georgia history. But yeah, man, I think like when the same thing as last year, you would hear certain things about him for practice, but then like he comes into games and looks really good, looks in command, is making checks. So I thought definitely felt like some real clear separation between him and the rest of the pack. I thought with Vandergriff and Stockton, my initial impression of Vandergriff was not as favorable as when I went back and watched the game again. And kind of like he did some really nice things. And there was a couple drives in there where, he's connecting and he looks in rhythm and it was good. I think from a processing, getting through read standpoint, still not, where Beck is, but I didn't think it was, a disastrous day for him by any, any means.
No, listen, and I think people have to recognize too, right? It in the eyes of coaches, G-Day is not bigger than any other scrimmage except for the environment, right? So at the end of the day, I think it's an important distinction that fans put a high priority on the spring game and put a high priority on seeing these kids for the first time in the spring after they have had 15 practices. And I think that's really important, but I don't think the coaching staff, they see these guys in practice every day. They see these guys in closed scrimmages. They see these guys going through progressions and actual, just rep after rep. And so I think with Brock Vandagriff, for example, I think the quarterback, I think the quarterback race was close coming into G-Day. I think there may be a little bit of separation because Beck played really well in that environment, but I don't think it's as far off as people think, right? And it'll be interesting to see with Brock Vandagriff, right? I mean, there's been a lot of murmurs from fans, especially is he going to transfer because they see the scrimmage and they think like, oh, this maybe this kid isn't going to make it at Georgia, but he is still one snap away from being the starting quarterback at the University of Georgia. So take that for what it's worth in terms of where the quarterback race is, but I think that's an important distinction. I don't think Brock Vandagriff played that bad, especially in a spring environment when you look at games that are really designed again not to show you too much. You're playing with kids who are taking their first rep running routes and in that environment, and I mean you gotta take it all in the context. So but I did think Beck definitely separated slightly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought Stockton, I saw from Stockton what I think you want to see from a young quarterback, which just was a grasp of what the priorities are in the Georgia offense, which is possession is valued above all else. You don't turn the football over. And, I saw multiple occasions where he was helping young receivers get lined up. Like I buy that he is well versed in this playbook and knows what's going on. And I thought made some good throws, made some not great throws. It is what it is. But again, it's one practice. I think that Georgia's quarterback room is in a healthy place going into the offseason. I think that's the big takeaway, right? Like Beck is probably the one, which is what we've all expected all along. But I think Vandergriff and Stockton are both guys you could build a game plan around, especially with the talent on Georgia's offense. And you could win a lot of games in the middle of the season if your starter was out hurt or whatever. And there's nothing that really makes quarterbacks better quite like live reps. And if one of those guys was in a situation where they did have to come in and start for a few weeks or a month, I think you would see them improve rapidly because that's what happens. We've seen that many times in the past. Other positions that you were watching, or anything else that you saw on G Day that stood out to you?
Man, Jonell Aguero is going to be a football player. Man,
that kid can move.
That kid can move. The fluidity with which he was, moving into coverage zones and things like that was just really good. I love seeing Tyke Smith out there making plays. That was, really exciting for me. I'm excited to see Tyke hopefully at full health. This is a guy who was an All-American his sophomore year at West Virginia. Just has a ton of talent, has struggled a little bit, both with, you're behind some really talented people, plus you have injuries that he's been dealing with. So was excited to see him out there making a couple plays. And, everybody was talking about Mekhi Muse, who, that guy, Kirby Smart, mentioned afterwards that he had embarrassed some guys on the scout team running scout team offense and embarrassed some defensive guys over the last year. So that was, those kind of things are really exciting about the spring game, right? You see those things, but I would say Tyke Smith, Jonell Aguero were two that I was just really excited to see play. I think the Georgia secondary is going to be really good, but one of the things that you have to have back there is you got to have depth, right? It's a tough season, and you got to have guys who at the safety positions, at the star positions, especially, and then those boundary corners, like you got to have guys that can go if somebody gets hurt for whatever reason. So it was just really excited to see the secondary out there playing. So
yeah, absolutely. I think the number 2 defensive back position opposite of Kamari Lassiter has been one of excellent interest or great interest. Sorry. Don't read and talk at the same time. I think that the thing that was really interesting to me is man, I'm in the Julian Humphrey camp now, and I wasn't expecting that. And that's not to say I am not a fan or a believer in Dalen Everett or Nyland Green, because I am. But those guys did a lot of really nice things. But Julian Humphrey, like physically, is just I hate to say this because I feel like it's like real football guy, but like he is built different. He looks like Malachi Starks when you talk about just like how his body is shaped, and you get down on the field and that dude is long and he is physical and he is fluid in the hips. And I thought he did some really nice things going back and watching. He was on the field for some of those early scores that the offense had with Beck. He was on the opposite side with the defense, but none of those balls were being thrown his way. Like the only throw that I could find that he gave up was a short little slant pattern to Tyler Williams that was in really tight coverage. So I think he's going to be a good one. And, maybe I could see him maybe being the type where, especially if Nyland Green stays around, like kind of an Amir Speed, Keely Ringo type situation there, where he sort of takes that job based on sheer talent sometime in mid to late September. But I think he's a really good player, and I think Georgia is very lucky to have kept him, because he was one that very easily could have hit the transfer portal last offseason, and I think stayed at Georgia for the right reasons.
Like it. Craig mentioned Georgia might have 3 to 4 true freshmen who would start anywhere else in the country, and then he followed up maybe 5 to 6. I mean, it's hard to disagree. I mean, there are, if you look at just the players that Georgia played last year, the true freshmen that Georgia played, you got guys on this team that are, I would argue, that are equally as talented. So, none are as long and thick as Julian Humphrey, but they are very, very talented. So, it's so
Yeah, I think the you mentioned CJ Allen earlier, but just how instinctual he is as a player, it really stands out. He's moving prior to the snap. A lot of times, like he's keying on the right hole or getting to the right spot on the field. So, seeing Ryan Davis transfer is just another reason why I think you can kind of count on his ascent.
Yeah, speaking of transfers, I mean, we should maybe talk about that a little bit. Who are some of the key, it's hard to say when Georgia has this much talent, who are the key transfers, but who are guys, maybe that will miss a little bit, whether that's for, what they've put into the program or the potential that they had and just couldn't quite get there. From your perspective, who are those guys that you're like, man, I wish, I guess all of these kids, we wish it worked out for them. They're all talented people, but who are the guys from your perspective that you're like, man, I wish maybe that would have worked out a little bit differently for this one or that one.
Yeah, I think Ryan Davis is one I'll start with just because he's been in the program a long time, and like even back in the fall camp prior to the 2021 season, like he was going to be part of that linebacker rotation and got hurt a lot in his career. And then finally he spends a season where he's semi-healthy. I don't think last year even he was really full speed. But he plays the third most inside linebacker snaps of anybody on the team on a 15-0 national championship team, right? Like and he knew what he was doing, and I liked his game in pass coverage, solid in run defense. Had a big sack in that Tennessee game. Like he could come in and give you a spark. I think there's so much talent behind him that it makes perfect sense why he would move on. But I think you miss guys like that in your locker room and in your meeting rooms who, know the defense inside and out. I think it was Glenn Schumann that posted a tweet of like, this dude's been part of my life since I got hired at Georgia, first as a recruit and then, as a player. Like he knows Georgia football and that standard that we talk about really well. So you want guys like that around. I think it's going to be the Marcus Washington thing is one where he's so young, and he came and enrolled early in college, skipped his senior year of high school,
reclassified. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He reclassified. So like he really should be an early enrollee right now. And he reclassified and came during fall camp last year. So talking about a guy who I'm sure looked around and saw a ton of talent around him. Yeah. But he was only there for 8 months. And Kamari Lassiter's probably gone after this coming season. Guys get hurt. It's just you see this a lot, I think. And I mean, Georgia can handle it better than any other program right now, but a guy transfers out and then 6 months later, not to say Washington would have been this way this year, but like, let's say Nyland Green was to leave between now and the end of the portal closing. Like, that's a guy where, he could have ended up playing 11 or 12 games as a starter if an injury breaks the wrong way.
Yeah, it definitely feels. I mean, these aren't similar necessarily, but because obviously, Marcus Washington didn't come for NIL or any of that type of stuff. But the Quinn Ewers situation at Ohio State felt a little bit similar, right? Where you have a kid who makes a decision to reclassify, skip a senior season, show up early. and then go through the process, and then look around and maybe make a decision that may turn out could have potentially turned out differently. I think Marcus Washington, I mean, is a super talented guy. Hate to lose him from, but that secondary, those DBs, man, that's a hard place to fit in at Georgia, especially if you're coming in as a reclassified, 17-year-old. It's like I can see where that can put you in a space, mentally, where you're like, oh man, it's going to be a little bit before I crack the field here.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, I think when I look at it, I think Ryan Davis would have been mine too. So we won't rehash that. I do think I think Eric Gilbert is one of those situations that I felt, I know it happened. It didn't happen after spring. It happened a little bit earlier, but I felt like that was a situation too where Georgia, gave everything they could to a kid, and
Right.
and he showed up and tried. I think there's a couple players like that in this class that just feels like Bear Alexander, one of those two, where what's happening, I think everybody can be aware of too, is that Kirby Smart is prioritizing culture above everything. He's prioritizing, like, we have a standard, we have a culture, and we're going to do our part, and you got to do your part. And I think you're seeing some of obviously not the majority of these transfers, all these transfers, but some of those are a consequence of that too, where it's just like, yeah, some guys are just not going to be the right fit at Georgia right now, whether talent aside. And so I think I'm interested to see who else. I think there are going to be more people that hit the portal, and I think Georgia has the potential to bring in some folks from the portal still too. So it should be an interesting revolving door through the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Bear Alexander situation is interesting because it is a situation where you are seeing Georgia say, we will, how should I put this? We will inconvenience ourselves at times for superior talent, but we are not going to change, what we fundamentally believe in and what we preach on a day in, day out basis. And, we're going
to, or how Georgia coaches.
Right.
I mean, these guys, people don't realize, I mean, we say it a lot, and I think other Georgia outlets say it too, and Kirby says it, but I mean, Georgia practices are intense. They are harder than the games.
Yeah.
Those coaches are absolute. They are on you, and they are going to definitely coach you very, very hard. And if you can't deal with that, separate from your talent, even sometimes separate from your culture fit in terms of like how you get along with your teammates or those types of things. I mean, some guys just don't react well to that environment and that type of coaching. And so, your Georgia will go through some hoops to bring in superior talent, but when you get here, you are going to be de-recruited, as they call it.
Yeah.
Right? Their goal is you are no longer, a 5-star number one player at your position in your class.
You're just some 4-string. I mean, that's all you are.
Yeah,
really,
yeah. You've done nothing. And so when you start at that point, I do think it is hard for some guys, no matter how talented they are, to climb that mountain, because there's just a lot of layers. There's coaching, there's culture, there's are you doing the right things, how you respond to your teammates. Your teammates are pushing you, and they've been here for a while, and you're this new guy. And I, personally, I don't envy these recruits. Of you spent the last 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 years since you were in 6th grade, sometimes of everyone in your life telling you you're the best at what you do, literally for like your whole high school career. And then even these coaches that are recruiting you are telling you how good you are and how much they want you and whatever. And then the minute you step on campus, it's like you're a nobody, like in terms inside that building. And mentally, it's got to be tough for some of these kids. So, but I am excited to see Georgia continue to prioritize culture. I think that's one of the things that has taken Kirby Smart over the hill is prioritizing culture.
Absolutely. And I think that it's the portal era. I mean, we're basically in a free agency era of college football, which is interesting to follow in and of itself. But I think it is going to create a lot of interesting rivalries in college football. Like Kirby Smart has had, a dislike, I'll say, for Ryan Day going back to when Justin Fields, there was a feeling that he was maybe tampered with a little bit, and that was pre-portal era, pre there being any portal to enter. And you look at this situation, like Bear Alexander was on the way out of Georgia no matter what. But, the day it gets announced, you've got his dad out at the USC spring game. Like, it's an interesting look, and it is an interesting situation. And you couple that with the Deuce Robinson recruitment and just a massive contrast in styles and the 2017 Rose Bowl. And I think that Kirby Smart and Lincoln Riley might be in like a little bit of a burgeoning rivalry. And the beauty, I think, is that a decade ago, or even, this year, like the chances of Georgia and USC playing are slim. And if it happens, it might happen once a decade if both programs are elite and going to the college football playoff. But you got the 12-team playoff coming up, and that means there's a good chance that those teams could play 3 or 4 times in 10 years if they both do things right. So I think that side of this is interesting because with the portal, there are certain teams that are playing by the rules. There are certain teams that are playing a little bit outside of the lines. And then there's a few teams that are playing way up here, kind of, like there aren't any rules. And right now there aren't. Nobody's getting in trouble for anything. But there's a lot of coaches. I shouldn't say coaches. There's a lot of programs who have people that speak for their program that are calling up star players, starters, good players on other teams' rosters and offering them shitloads of money. And that, that happened with A.D. Mitchell. And, everyone thinks it was Texas, and it was, but USC was calling him up before he was in the portal as well, right? Like, that's okay. It's going to happen. Like, it's not the end of the world. Nobody's going to jail for it. But I do think that Kirby Smart, like, he is never going to go in the press and name names. The guy will get up and he'll talk about how much respect he has for the coach on the opposing sideline, and he will do all that. But that dude never forgets anything. He never forgets anything. And promise you that, when Texas comes to Athens in 2024 or 2025, like, there's going to be a couple garbage time touchdowns that get paid back because of this. And likewise be said for USC in a playoff scenario down the road.
Yeah, I would also say tampering is something that is definitely impossible to prove.
Right.
And so if people are pissed about tampering, I would just be careful because Kirby Smart is, he's a high caliber, highly intentional, highly strategic football coach. And there will be times where Georgia might get a transfer and it's like, oh, wait a second, that feels like tampering. Because I think Kirby Smart will also not be in a situation where if these things are going on and nothing is being enforced, because you can enforce it. I'm interested to see in the future. You mentioned like, yeah, when they come and play Georgia, yes, there's that. But I also think there's going to be an opportunity where, yeah, that's a nice player you got over there, Steve Sarkisian. I need him on my team, right? Or Lincoln Riley, or Ryan Day, or anybody else. I think at the end of the day, this is college football now, and I don't like it. I don't like that. Bear Alexander's guardian was at the USC spring game on the day that Bear Alexander announced he was transferring, and then he ends up transferring to USC. But at the end of the day, I also think if this is going to be the new college football, I fully expect Georgia to work within the rules and within the bounds, but also be very strategic about how Georgia thinks about transfers and recruiting and all those things, roster management. So just a little plug there. I saw a lot of people getting upset. And, for me, I'm like, man, I don't like it, but also at the end of the day, if Kirby Smart decides to go out and steal a player in a form or fashion, I'm not going to be mad about it either.
For sure. No, I mean, it is. It's just part of the game these days. Speaking of transfer portal, you watched the Colorado spring game this weekend, and I did too. And I thought it was interesting because, like, it was kind of witnessing in real time, like a program deciding to say, like, okay, like we're gonna go play with the big boys now, or we're gonna at least attempt to. We're gonna really invest money in this. We're really gonna invest resources in it, and we're, it's kind of I don't know. We haven't really seen this since like Baylor under Bryles. Building a new stadium and doing some things. But I just thought it was kind of fascinating to watch all of that excitement. And then we also get to see kind of the come down from that here over the last 48 hours.
Yeah, 13 players so far in the transfer portal since the spring game. Yeah. Listen, here's the thing. I think Deion, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Colorado was at 92 scholarship players before the spring game. So they were going to have to cut some more guys to get to their number anyway. So I think, that played a part in some of these transfers. But, Deion, it's going to be interesting to see what happens at Colorado. I personally love what happened with the spring game at Colorado on Saturday, with Deion being Deion, with like the flashiness, the football. Candidly, the football was not that great, but the atmosphere was what you want from college football. So I love it. I think it was, I think it was such a good, refreshing thing for a team that went 1-11 last year. To have their stadium full in the snow on a spring game is just, that's good for college football. I personally liked it.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people that are rooting for Deion to fail, and I just don't think he will. First of all, it's going to be really hard to fail at Colorado. Success will be, this year, if you can somehow manage to win 4 or 5 games, that'll be successful over last year, and then you have something to build on going forward. But I do think the culture, I think Deion has to be. I think it's going to be interesting because when you're playing in a Power 5 conference, I guess the Pac-12 is still Power 5, maybe at least for a couple more years, and then we'll see if they get downgraded with USC and UCLA and whoever else leaving. But when you're playing in a Power 5 conference with that schedule, there's only so much that reality show and razzle dazzle, and
the schedule's tough. They got a tough
it's a tough schedule. Yeah, when you get in the heat of that thing, you really are going to have to understand, am I building a culture that kids are going to believe in, or am I building a culture that, that I kind of created as smoke and mirrors, and then does it all fall apart when you get punched in the face, right? Because Colorado is going to get punched in the face multiple times this season, and that's where you're going to see, is this a resilient culture, or is this, is this the primetime show that's going to fall apart when things get tough?
That's right. And I do think it's interesting because there appears to, I don't think Dion has maybe been quite as enthusiastic with some of the holdovers that he inherited as he has with some of the guys that have come here with him or signed here as freshmen.
I firmly believe if Dion could have started with 0 players and rebuilt that team, he would have. I mean,
which I don't think he would have been wrong to do. He's got to turn that roster. That roster was not good, but you got a guy like Montana Lamonius Craig, one of the all-time college football names, really. But, he's a guy that was on the team. 6'2", 190-pound wide receiver. Had a 98-yard touchdown on Saturday. I think had multiple touchdown catches. Had 500 yards receiving on a really terrible Colorado team last year. Like, he is a player that you need if you're Deion Sanders, and he has a breakout game on Saturday and hits the portal. So, I mean, I think the thing that is interesting is just in the media, we either see a lot of people sort of bashing Deion, or we see a lot of people hyping him up and talking about how badly kids want to play for him. And the reality is that it goes both ways, and it depends on the situation and the depth chart and all the other usual factors. Like, he's still got to deal with all the same stuff that modern college football coaches have to. So,
well, everyone has, Mike Tyson said it best. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And Colorado is going to get punched in the face, and I think Deion, we'll see what they're made of.
What do you think TCU beats them by in their opening game?
I don't know, man. TCU.
I think that spread is like 22 right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a bloodbath. Mostly because I think TCU. I think what Colorado. At least the team that Deion has formed so far, I think
it's down to 16.5.
Okay. I still think the physicality is going to be very different. And I hope, Deion has a good, decent coaching staff. But you got to have, like, that strength and conditioning program. You got to have one that, you got to go through a couple of cycles when you have the team that he has right now. And I think that physicality, especially TCU's offensive line and running game against those linebackers and that defensive front, I think it's going to be a tough day. It's going to be a tough day for Colorado.
I agree. Other spring games that happened this weekend. One of those was Alabama. I watched 2.5, 3 quarters of it. I don't think they have a quarterback. I mean, they have a lot of quarterbacks, but I don't think they have one that you'd want to start tomorrow.
Wait, Graham. You're telling me that Nick Saban in year, what is this, 17, 16, 17?
Yeah.
Doesn't have a quarterback?
It appears he does not.
Boy. Oh, boy. Yeah.
Folks are saying he doesn't know how to manage a quarterback room. We're not saying that, but people are saying that.
Listen, if you can't win a national championship with Bryce Young as your starting quarterback, like, you really, you have to look yourself in the mirror. When you have Will Anderson and Bryce Young on the same football team and you can't win a national championship, I just think you have to really look yourself in the mirror and be honest with yourself. And I think, what Nick Saban is right now is reaping the rewards of having Bill O'Brien as his offensive coordinator. And so you have two quarterbacks that were under the tutelage of Bill O'Brien for the last couple of years, right? And that's what you're dealing with. And so I think he thought, you could plug and play this old, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian offense, and now, you got two quarterbacks that can't seem to run it. So I'm interested to see, Alabama's. I'm very interested to see their quarterback competition, but also I wasn't super impressed with their skill players either. I mean, you got wide receivers dropping balls. Again, it's a spring game, but like there was nothing about what Alabama did in their spring game that you would look at and say, dang, that's Alabama football. Unless you watch Alabama play, versus uh, LSU last year or versus Tennessee last year. You watch them play against Texas last year, then you're like, okay, yeah, maybe this is Alabama football. Maybe this is Alabama football in 2023. So I'm interested. I'm really interested to see what happens over the next few months because Alabama they have Texas in week 2?
Yeah.
And listen, like Texas, Texas is not, Texas is not. They're not barn burners. Yeah, they're not barn burners. They're not, I don't think Texas is necessarily SEC ready, but I do think Texas has enough talent on that roster that if Alabama, especially in the secondary, watching Kool-Aid McKinstry just get cooked in the spring game, watching stuff like that happen, it's like, man, I'd be careful with Texas.
Texas can score enough points to make Alabama have to score points, and that's going to be a problem with what they have right now as that offense is currently constructed. Because Jalen Milroe, he completed half of nearly 40 attempts and got sacked 7 times, that's a lot of times to get sacked. And then on the other side, you've got Ty Simpson, who I believe did not reach the 50% completion benchmark either. So honestly, what struck me was just watching the Georgia spring game versus the Alabama spring game. Alabama reminded me of Georgia in Kirby's kind of like second year, or maybe even into the third year, where the top line of players are very good, very athletic.
Yeah.
But when you get into the second and third strings, there's some weaknesses there. There's some guys you don't really want to call upon. And Georgia now, man, it's just, I mean, you're standing out there and shit, the third tight end looks like a freaking mutant, Xavier Sori's been sitting on the bench for 3 years or 2 years and looks all of a sudden like this all-world inside linebacker who's the light has finally come on for. Just the Alabama is still signing the type of guys for the most part that Georgia is signing, but they look the same 2 to 3 years down the road as they did when they jumped on campus. And Georgia they're just coaching these guys up much better. And it's interesting to see.
Yeah. Milroe reminded me of a quarterback that Georgia will see this year, will likely see this year, which is Joe Milton at Tennessee, right? I mean, he made a few good throws, but like the overall, I think you're exactly right. It's kind of the overall feeling, the overall cohesiveness and consistency just wasn't there. And I think, as Chris said, Justice Haynes looked great. I think Justice Haynes is going to be
great.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be good. And I think in this Alabama offense, at least this iteration of it this year, he's going to have to be good because I think the skill players on the outside are likely still lacking outside of, you get past like Ja'Cory Brooks maybe, and then you got, some guys who are still trying to figure it out. And I think you're right. I think that comparison with the difference between Kirby's second or third year at Georgia is the offensive line was significantly better.
That's true.
Than what I think Alabama is going to have.
Yeah.
I mean, you had, in that 2018 team, you had Andrew Thomas and Ben Cleveland and those guys that I think Alabama is just they just don't have those guys, right? You don't have a
No,
and Isaiah Wilson or any of those caliber of
the
offensive linemen.
Sawyer.
Yeah,
Showing up on
exactly. So
campus.
Georgia was able to, with guys like, no offense to any of these guys, but with guys like Tyler Simmons playing wide receiver and Akil Crumpton and Jason Stanley and Demetrius Robertson and all these guys, was able to put up some good numbers in 2018 because you had a quarterback who could manage the offense and Jake Fromm, and you had, very good running backs and DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield and Brian Herrien, and then you had an offensive line that could block.
Right.
And so I think Bama will, they will have one or two, maybe three guys on an offensive line that are absolute studs, but it's just weird to be talking about Alabama's still trying to figure out the quarterback and Alabama's still trying to figure out the offensive line. And, especially in that situation where Georgia, it's like, man, we're not as deep as we were in the offensive line, but you still have full confidence in going too deep in that offensive line. And Alabama, it's like, I don't know, man. I watched that offense, and I don't know that I'd feel comfortable going too deep in two or three of those spots.
I don't think you feel comfortable with your starters in a lot of those spots.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
And I think that's been the problem with Alabama's offense for a couple of years now.
I mean, listen,
Bryce Young was so good that he papered over a lot of problems with that offensive line, and he was capable of dodging an oncoming free rusher and then delivering a freaking spot on crossing route 18 yards downfield. Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson ain't doing that. And there's not many guys that can, not, to be fair to them. But I just think that they could have a long year. And you were talking about Justice Haynes, and the chat was talking about Justice Haynes, and he's a very talented player. And you saw some of that talent on Saturday. But the interesting thing about Alabama at this point in time of the Saban dynasty is he going to regret being there when he's finishes his sophomore year and he's already got 600 touches on his body and he's got a full year of college football left to go?
Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah, I think he's got to hope that Roydell Williams and Jace McClellan, those guys are healthy and can actually produce. Because otherwise, I do think it's going to be. It'll be. I think, sadly for Georgia fans, because I wanted both of these players, but I think there's going to be a lot of Justice Haynes and Caleb Downs for Alabama, and I don't know that that's a good thing for Alabama.
It's not ever a good. No matter how good they are, you don't ever want to be relying that much on true freshmen to come in.
No, definitely not. Especially not in pass protection when you got downs where you have to throw the ball.
Correct.
Awesome.
Yeah.
One question I think we probably should go back to, because I think this is an interesting question that we should talk about. Transfers, Xavier Sorey. This question is Xavier Sorey prime for more snaps with Davis and Marshall leaving and young guys still learning the defense? What I think maybe would love to hear your thoughts on is Xavier Sorey might be one of those, but who are the guys that you feel like, whether it's transfer related or whether it's just their time, are guys that we feel like are going to put it together this season for Georgia?
Xavier Sorey is definitely one of them. And I definitely agree with, I think he's primed for more snaps, especially as you get the young guys up to speed. It is like the way that he played on G-Day and the way that he looked, where for the first time in his career, it looked like he knew exactly what he was doing as an off-ball linebacker.
Dude, his
athletically,
that strength and conditioning pro. He came in as a premier athlete, and he has done nothing but get more premier, if that's a way to talk about it.
Right. 100%. And I think As far as guys who, it's
Mm-hmm.
their time, so to speak, I definitely think that Branson Robinson, like
Yep.
the things that we were hearing about him prior to him having to end his spring a little bit early,
Mm-hmm.
he's looking like that dude. And that's not to say Kendall Milton's not going to be an important part of the team, because he will. Georgia needs 3 to 4 good running backs at all times. That's how they roll. Arian Smith, like this is the longest stretch he's ever been healthy, and he
Mm-hmm.
looks like the guy that we all kind of want him to be. And I think what's most exciting for Georgia fans is you saw him where he's starting to develop some intermediate routes that he can use to really kind of keep defenses honest, especially when he's facing man coverage. Like if
Mm-hmm.
he can reliably catch, an 8 to 12 yard slant over the middle, that means you can't just sit back and give him 12 yards of cushion and guard against the deep ball.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden on third down, he can either hit you for an intermediate route, or he can
Yeah.
go 75 yards on you. Not a guy that we've been like talking about or waiting on for a long time, but man, Lawson Lucky. And this is not a knock on Oscar Delp at all, but just like he was the first guy I noticed when I went down on the field for warmups, and I saw him before I saw his number, and I also didn't even really know what his number was yet, because we're learning all these new players and their numbers, and I was just like, holy shit, man! Like that guy is, he's not Darnell Washington, but he is very impressive athletically, and the reason why I think he's going to play a lot of snaps for Georgia is Georgia's first drive of the spring game with the first team offense. Four of the 6 plays featured 2 tight ends in the game, so I don't think Georgia's going away from their multiple tight end sets. But B, I think he's already probably a little bit more equipped to be an inline tight end than Delp is. I think Delp is much more natural as that stand up sort of Y tight end in the slot. So I think he's going to play a lot. But Tyke Smith, finally healthy as well, looked really good. Have heard good things about him all spring, so I would put him on that list.
Yeah,
and I don't know. Do you have some that you want?
Yeah, I think two a little bit off the radar that will get significant snaps this year: Kristen Miller and EJ Lightsey. I think, especially with Davis and Marshall transferring, I think EJ, the staff is really high on him, and I think he's just going to be really. I think he's just going to be a really good player by the time it's all said and done. So I think if you look at that 2 deep linebacker position, I think he'll get some good snaps. And Kristen Miller too, with Bear Alexander transferring. Obviously Georgia rotates the defensive line significantly, but I think when you look at who's behind Warren Brinson or Stackhouse or Zion Logue or those guys, I think Kristen Miller is gonna get in there and do some damage.
He played really well too on G-Day, man. Like, if you go back and just find him for a couple series and watch his play, I think it was impressive, and I was really impressed with. I put a clip of it on Twitter where there's one pass rush that he has where he just basically stutter steps, gets the guard leaning, and then rips him down and goes free for an easy sack. And it's like,
man,
again, you're talking about a guy who's, he doesn't even have a full year really in the program yet. He's not a sophomore yet, and he's already showing you pass rush moves as a defensive tackle.
Yeah, if you go watch his go to Max Preps or whatever and watches or Huddle and watches his high school highlights, that dude, I mean, he was a man among boys. Like you kind of when they come into Georgia, these kids can sometimes get a little lost in their first year, especially when they're focused on strength and conditioning.
Mhm.
You don't see them on the field as much. They're red-shirted, like those types of things. But man, there's a play that I remember that maybe I'll throw on Twitter of him where he essentially took the center and ran the center back into the quarterback and the running back and like tackled all three of them. Well, like he didn't even know who had the ball. He just like tackled three dudes like on just a bull rush. But then there are those plays that you'll see in high school where like he's doing pass rush moves as a junior and senior in high school that are legit. And so I think there's a reason why these guys end up at Georgia. And so I think you're right. That's why I love seeing him the development in the spring game.
One other I'll throw on that list is Ingram,
Sure.
Ingram Dawkins, Tyron Ingram Dawkins.
Yeah. Gonna be a beast.
Yeah, he's always had that, like he's always flashed that type of ability, but I think now that he's just focused, I think, in a way that maybe it hasn't been in years past. And age creates urgency, and I think he's kind of getting to, he's an upperclassman now, or he will be in 2023.
Yeah.
And I think Georgia fans should be excited about him.
All right, let's do two more quick questions and then we'll get out of here. What's more likely for Georgia this year, 1,000-yard rusher or 1,000-yard receiver?
I think rusher, honestly. I know people will disagree with that, but I think there's so much receiving talent. Like that receiver room goes 10, 12 deep, and the tight end room goes 3 deep with really talented guys. I think Brock Bowers is, again, the most likely. I think if you're talking about just a pass catcher who could hit 1,000 yards, he's come close 2 years in a row. But I would think rusher, and I would think it would be Branson, honestly.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I think I'm gonna go the other way, and I'll say receiver.
Please do.
I don't think it'll be Brock Bowers though. I think you're gonna see somebody like Dominic Lovett just break out, which would be wild for Georgia's second 1,000-yard receiver in history to be somebody they got from the transfer portal.
Be the way of the world these days, right?
Yeah. All right, last question, and then we'll wrap it up. How will Aaron Rodgers to the Jets impact Georgia's quarterback room? Do you have any thoughts, Graham?
Jesus, Craig
wants to know.
How about this?
People are asking.
Folks want to know. I think it just means that they're less likely to be there when everyone's in on the Carson Beck sweepstakes next draft, right? I don't know.
Yeah. I think this is how it's going to affect the quarterback room is Aaron Rodgers sat behind Brett Favre, watched Brett Favre, do his thing, and then was given the keys, and then, became Aaron Rodgers. And I think Carson Beck has a similar story this year.
Fair enough.
Or Gunnar Stockton, or anybody else. That's what I think. So that's going to be my take on it. Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. God, who would have thought Brett Favre to the Jets, Aaron Rodgers to the Jets, the Jets just taking Wash Green Bay quarterback.
Right. I mean, yeah, it is what it is.
All right. Anything else before we get out of here?
I got a film study up on DawgsCentral for subscribers of Dylan Raiola. So you should go check that out. Just I don't know. No reason why.
Do you think?
Just felt like doing one.
Do you think Dylan Raiola is going to be SEC ready?
Do I think Dylan Raiola is going to be SEC ready? Oh, man. Yeah. I think he's going to be as ready as anyone. I think he's the best quarterback prospect that we've seen since Trevor, honestly.
Yeah, I think so too.
His field awareness is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think there are quarterbacks that get hyped.
They gotta hype them every year. They gotta hype a couple guys
for
right?
sure. That you got to find the quarterback that you're going to hype in a class, right?
Ewers,
Ewers, Arch Manning,
Nico.
you know, like you had, Nico. You had
Nico
all these
was
guys.
fun to watch.
Yeah, you had all these guys. What I will say is, I think Raiola is. I think Raiola is what. How do I put it this way? There are so many similarities to him and Bryce Young, except he's bigger. When they were in high school, so Bryce Young was hyped like this too. I think Raiola is he comes from a football family, and I think from a training and kind of strength and conditioning. Plus, he's also 6'3", but I mean 6'3", 215, 220, whatever he is.
Yeah.
But can just absolutely get after it. I think he's the real deal.
I think the thing with Raiola too is just that he I really like as far as what he's doing offensively, it translates well to the SEC and to Georgia specifically. He gets through his reads. He's really good off script. He's got legs, but he always is trying to pass first, which is rare amongst high school quarterbacks. Like he checks all the boxes pretty easily.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, if you haven't checked it out, go get over to DawgsCentral, watch Graham's film study on Raiola. I highly recommend it. I think it's really interesting. If you're interested in joining us at DawgsCentral, go on over and sign up. You can sign up for a free trial and try it out and decide to keep it or not. And we would love to have you over there. We're going to have a lot more content coming over the next few weeks. Especially, we got the NFL draft coming. We didn't even talk about that. Graham, do you have any thoughts on the NFL draft?
I got a lot of thoughts on the NFL draft.
All right, well,
maybe come back.
We'll do a show on the draft. We'll do a show on the draft. All right, well, look out for that. We'll see y'all next time.